When is it time to call it quits on your business? That's one of the hardest questions any entrepreneur will ever face because the advice around entrepreneurship is usually fairly one-sided. You hear things like never give up or push through the hard parts and success comes to those who persevere. And sometimes all of that's true. But there's another reality that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Sometimes the smartest move an entrepreneur can make is to stop. Not necessarily because they failed, but because after a lot of reflection, they realize it's just not working. And in this episode, I want to talk about how to recognize when a business still deserves more time, maybe the warning signs that something might be fundamentally wrong. And last but not least, how to decide whether to keep going or just walk away without feeling like you wasted all this time and this effort. Because knowing when to push forward and knowing when to pivot or shut something down are both part of becoming a smarter entrepreneur. Hi, I'm Matt. I've spent over 25 years building companies as a serial entrepreneur and helping small business owners navigate challenges and avoid costly mistakes. On this channel, I talk about the real world side of entrepreneurship, especially for people who are thinking about starting a business, still working toward their first dollar and beyond. Have you ever thought about shutting it all down? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments. One of the biggest myths in entrepreneurship is that quitting always equals failure, and it doesn't. So let's just get that out of your head right away. In reality, experienced entrepreneurs shut things down all the time. Ideas evolve and markets change, life priorities shift, and sometimes you simply learn something that changes the equation. The real danger isn't quitting. Let me say that again. Quitting isn't the real danger. The real danger is quitting for the wrong reasons or refusing to quit when the evidence is clear. And this conversation is especially important if you're still pre-revenue, because before your first dollar, your job isn't to protect the business. Your job is to test it. You're trying to answer some basic questions. Does anyone care about this? Will someone pay for it? And does the math work? And sometimes the honest answer to those questions leads you in a different direction. But before we talk about when it might be time to walk away, let's start with the mistake I see people making all the time. And this one, it's quitting for the wrong reason. A lot of businesses get abandoned right before they could start working. And it's not because the idea is bad, but because the process is uncomfortable. Early stage entrepreneurship is going to be awkward. You have sales conversations that feel clumsy, and you explain your idea and people just look back at you confused. You hear no more often than you'd like, and progress can be really slow. But slow progress and no progress are two very different things. If the customers are responding, if you're learning something new every week, and if your offer keeps getting clearer, then what you're experiencing may just be the normal friction of building something new. And quitting because something feels uncomfortable is very different from quitting because something just doesn't work. Now let's talk about one of the more serious warning signs. Sometimes you put an idea out into the world and the world just kind of shrugs. Nobody's asking questions. No one's reaching out. Nobody's buying. And when people hear about it, their reaction's like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But that response is a little deceiving, isn't it? Because it sort of feels polite, but maybe it's just indifference. And in business, indifference is often a stronger signal than outright rejection. With rejection, people understand the offer and they don't want it. Indifference usually means maybe the problem you're solving just isn't painful enough. And if you've been putting real effort into something and the market still isn't responding, that may be hard to understand, but it's a signal and it's worth paying attention to. Another reason businesses sometimes need to be shut down is just simply bad economics. Sometimes the idea works, customers like it, and people are willing to pay, but the numbers just don't cooperate. Maybe the margins are too thin and the cost of finding new customers is too high. Maybe the work required for each client is just a lot larger than expected. And this happens, quite honestly, more than you think. You can have a business that technically works, but still doesn't make sense financially. And if the math never improves, Continuing to push forward may just be prolonging the inevitable. At some point, a business has to support itself. There's another situation that shows up a lot for entrepreneurs who start businesses in their 40s and 50s and 60s. The business works, but it doesn't fit their life. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I talked with someone who started a mobile catering business. The idea was solid. Customers were interested, and the work paid fairly well. All signs were pointing up. But there was a catch. Most of the demand was for weekends and evenings. And at first, not a big deal. That's just the cost of building a business. But over time, the schedule started to wear on him and his family. I mean, his weekends basically disappeared and vacations became so much harder to schedule. Family time was completely unpredictable. And the business slowly started creating more tension at home. Now, here's the important part. The business itself wasn't failing. I mean, the customers were happy. His reputation was stellar. But the life that came with the business, it just wasn't sustainable. And eventually he made the decision to just shut it down. Not because the idea was bad, but because it didn't fit the life he wanted. And that's a decision more entrepreneurs should give themselves permission to make. When someone asks me whether they should quit their business, I usually ask them a question in return. If you were starting fresh today, would you choose the business again? Not considering the time you've already invested, not the money you've already spent, just the opportunity itself. Would you choose it again? If the honest answer is yes, then the business maybe deserves more effort. Keep grinding. But if the honest answer is no, you wouldn't do it again, well, that's a good signal. Because the most dangerous place an entrepreneur can end up is continuously doing something only because they already started it. In business, we call that sunk cost trap. Or in poker, it's being pot committed, right? And it keeps people stuck in the wrong business far longer than they should be. And they start to make decisions for, all the wrong reasons. One last thing, and it may be the most important takeaway from this episode. Ending a business doesn't mean the experience was wasted. And I know it feels like it, in the moment. But sometimes the lessons that you've learned lead directly to the next opportunity. Sometimes the customers reveal a different problem we're solving. And sometimes the skills you developed become valuable just later down the line. And sometimes the real win is just simply getting clarity. Because entrepreneurship is not just about persistence, the blood, the sweat, the tears. It's about judgment, knowing when to keep pushing and knowing when it's time to redirect your energy towards something better. Both of those decisions require courage. And sometimes the smartest entrepreneurs are the ones who know when to stop, just so they can start again with something better. I'm curious about your experience with this. Have you ever walked away from a business or an idea? And looking back now, what do you think? Was it the right decision? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to discuss it with you. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. And if you're thinking about starting a business, you're still working towards that first dollar, or if you've already made it and you're figuring out what comes next, this channel, my episodes are here to help you think through the decisions that really matter. So make sure to subscribe and you'll keep getting more episodes. And if there's a question you want me to cover in future episodes, drop it down in the comments or send me an email. Believe it or not, that's where I go for future episodes. So until next time, take a breath. You've got this. All right, what's next?